and welcome to Making Drupal Friendly for Editors and Clients. Drupal's extensibility lets us create the perfect CMS for our organizations, but all too often that same level of thoughtfulness in our design isn't applied to our editorial interfaces. So I hope you leave this session with some ideas for taming your content forms, for building out useful content dashboards, and enhancing editor workflows. My name is Jim Bomero, and I'm a senior engineer at Four Kitchens. I have over 10 years experience in Drupal, and I use the framework for all my nerdy hobbies, from running homebrew calculations and brewing beer to planning my retro arcade builds to teaching kids to prepare for the zombie apocalypse at summer camps. You'll see some of that in this slide deck. If you have any questions about my presentation, please reach out. I love to talk shop, and we'll keep this conversation going. I'm a web chef at Four Kitchens, and we build websites and apps for organizations that depend on large-scale or unconventional content. We work with associations, publishers, enterprise organizations, in media and in higher ed, and we make big websites. Now, every Drupal site is different, and every content model is custom. What makes our sites unique also makes it extremely challenging to represent our editorial interfaces in a consistent way or have any real training out-of-the-box materials. And so this could put us at a huge disadvantage when compared to other CMSs. Another former love in my life, if you're unfamiliar, let's look at WordPress. This is when I got started in 2011. I was doing a lot of WordPress sites. And if you are familiar with it, it should be similar to your experience. On the left sidebar, there's post pages, media, links. And on the right, there's a publishing pane. So out of the box, you're having a draft, a preview, a visibility. And this was in 2011. Let's fast forward a little to 2014, WordPress 3.7. There were a lot of updates to WordPress, but still we see that same interface. It's a little more modern, but the pages in the hierarchy of the content on the left using the same labels, on the right, similar publishing interface. And then the screenshot that I grabbed last week, 2019, this is the latest version. Now Gutenberg has made a more rich content tool set, but largely we have the same experience. The left pane has similar labels, the right pane is our publishing settings, and if you're familiar with WordPress 10 years ago, you'll probably pick it up pretty quickly now. I haven't seen that across my Drupal sites, and I don't think that's necessarily a weakness, but it is a call to action for us to start personalizing these experiences to who we're building them for. So there's many reasons why I choose Drupal over WordPress for a given project. Drupal's flexibility can be its greatest strength, but there's that price to pay. Having non-standard tools means reinventing the wheel and just larger training gaps on our site. Luckily though, that flexibility we apply to building out the sites could also hit the back end of our sites. And this is my conversation starter that sometimes node is a four-letter word, one of those taboo phrases you don't use in front of your clients. It's a signal that we're usually working pretty far under the hood. And as site builders, we may know that, oh, that icon on the left side, that's in the template, and the banner image, that's part of an entity queue, and they rotate out, and there's a different place to manage that. The menu is a Drupal menu, but the call to action button on the right, that's stored in configuration. That can only be updated maybe through a code push. There's a block in the middle, but the pieces below, those aren't blocks. Those are generated through taxonomy terms with some sort of sorting. That's a lot of jargon, when really our editors are just asking, can I edit that? Can I edit that? How do I edit that? How do I make this thing go away? Or what breaks my heart, well, this is easy to do in insert CMS name. So this is rough. My team loves Drupal, we're downright evangelists, but our clients shouldn't have to worry about what's under the hood so they can manage their content. Making Drupal friendly for clients means checking these words like node, taxonomy, blocks, and all that jargon at the door, and building interfaces that are intuitive and distraction-free. So I think for me, this starts with user stories. I love and I hate watching the folks that I build websites for actually use the website. It's a great learning opportunity, and it breaks my heart to see their content workarounds because it didn't work the way they were expecting, so they invented a new way, and they're very good at that. But also it's enlightening. This is how I figured out how they actually want to manage content. So I encourage you to look over the shoulder of the folks who are using your websites and learn how they use the different features or the ones they don't even know about, and accept that as a fault of the CMS or how we've implemented it. Maybe we could have trained them better, but it should be intuitive. Take those stories, embrace them, and capture them for the community. This is very much what this presentation is here. This is a summary of user stories and tweaks we've made based on other content workarounds. This presentation is intended for project owners who are influential in how content is displayed on the back end. I am a back-end engineer. I will probably be avoiding most of the back-end talk, but the sky is the limit. So I will drop some module names. I will revert to mostly using views and blocks and very standard out-of-the-box Drupal components. But truth be told, Drupal is a system you can completely customize, and I often do. I'm just not going to get too heavy in the code today. So my first story, let's start at the beginning. How do I log in? The login screen is your editor's first impression, so let's make it a good one. In this case, user is that 4-letter taboo word. And I hate to explain to somebody, oh, it's easy to log in. Just go to your site and then put the highly intuitive /user at the end. No, that's a failure already. We can do better. And so with that, let's remove some barriers. I have 2 suggestions here. First, let's create a button or a link. You can put this in a global space, such as a header or a footer, but truthfully, not every page needs a login link for your sites. So often I'll just create a landing page, an editor portal, if you will, where they have instructions on how to log in. In this case, this was for a higher ed website. So a login link with, actually, one of the most important things, context around it, why and how they're logging in, instructions at the bottom of what to do if you need help with a link for more information. That will be a going theme through all of this, is not only do we want to give them better interfaces, but give them an outlet to vent or request feature changes. So adding help text and a button will anchor them, give them a spot to bookmark of how to log into this site. /user just wasn't cutting it for me. I'd also suggest maybe just creating a memorable login URL. User is certainly an out-of-the-box construct, but you can use /login. There is nothing stopping you from redirecting someone from login to the user. You can use WP admin if you have a WordPress shop heavy and they're used to going to something like that. Why not? I think there's a cautionary note. The easier you make it to log in, the more robots are going to hit your form and maybe try to do nefarious stuff, but that's going to happen anyways. So it just felt like it was worth cautioning. Once you get to the form, there are a lot of ways we can clean this up. So it always bothers me that out of the box, there's nothing inherently wrong. It just feels like it needs some love. Username and password. And this was for a conference I was working on. Enter your web conference username. Well, I kind of figured that one out. And password. Enter the password that accompanies your username. You know, this really isn't helping me. So this is an example of me. I think I've just used a form alter, but these are forms. You can theme them like any other. To rearrange this form a little bit, instead of having to reset your password as a tab, including it as help text underneath the password, also once again including a support link, because folks are going to have problems, so let's give them that outlet right up front. And if you do have the ability to use some sort of single sign-on option, I generally say go for it. It's one less thing for me to have to worry about and manage. I don't like to worry about password policies. Plus, for your inherent internal systems, they will know how to log in, hopefully. The last part on this login experience is what happens when you're in. And this one is also rough for me. Most of the time, we're directed to our user page. And most of the sites I work on are not community sites, so that user page is pretty much meaningless to me. But guess what? It's Drupal. You can do what you want. So try to pick a location that makes sense for you. Instead, choose something that's more useful based on their common personas. It's easy to use, say, the rules module or just through some custom code. There are simple redirects, I believe, on a hook user login where you can look at the account of the person logging in and send them somewhere. So it doesn't even need to be the same place. Your publishing editors that are approving content can be taken to a dashboard of all things waiting for their approval. Your content contributors can be taken to a dashboard of content they were recently working on. So these are very easy wins that you can just say, per role, here are the places I want to redirect you to. And I have to assume for most sites, it's better than this experience. Although, you know, it's neat to know I was a member for 2 years, 7 months. And once you're in the site, what are you seeing? Admin themes are definitely a win. They're something I embrace, but I use them cautiously. There's only a handful that I recommend. I've included 3 on the screen. And Minimal is an easy one to recommend because I believe it's the most installed admin theme on Drupal.org outside of the ones that come out of the box. So contributed themes. Minimal is built on 7. It's very stable. Likewise, the one in the middle is Thunder. And Thunder is also an extension of 7, but it includes a lot of additional components for editorial workflow. I believe there's some enhancements to paragraphs, enhancements to media. And actually the Thunder theme is part of a larger Thunder distribution. They have a nice demo online. I encourage you to check it out. If you're not using the distribution though, a lot of the popular tools have spun off into custom modules and themes. So Thunder's wonderful. And the last one, 42, I enjoy that very much because it felt like a designer started with it and then we built a theme around it. There's just some minor enhancements that make it a little easier to read, a little easier to tab. The buttons are bigger, the color contrast is less blocky, but with it, find something that fits your needs. And with the theme also come the toolbar. So we see that standardized now in Drupal 8, the toolbar running across the top of the site. Use that as best fits your audience. So just like the admin theme, weigh some of the contribution or some of the code that people have used to adjust the toolbar, or just use it out of the box. For me, I end up disabling almost all of the links across the top for most of my users because, and we'll get into this in a second, a lot of the pages are challenging to understand because they were written in a way that they work for every Drupal site ever. I'd rather give you a custom and personalized experience, so I will replace that content silo of links with something personal to the organization, where the managed content screens are broken out, the managed user screens provide additional value and metadata, and even media management is one that just needs a lot more information to be useful for your site. So dashboards is what I keep alluding to, and for me that's a set of tools, reports, interfaces, widgets, whatever you call them, blocks that are going to be usually a single page or a series of pages that your content team is going to use as interfaces. I have lots of examples, but I think the theme here is that for every site I've had to create custom interfaces, usually on a per content type basis. So as I mentioned, when you first log in, that main content page just isn't doing it for me. The instructions, this is an example of one I have replaced it with for news. The instructions always appear at the top of my content overview pages. I will sometimes seed these with what I think the instructions are, but truly I want the folks who are using this tool to write the instructions. It should be in their vocabulary. It should talk about the intent of the content, not just the data model, which is what I end up referencing most of the time when I write instructions. So being able to explain what, why, and how in the correct voice and tone at the top of a content overview pane, and then also additional details of what the Drupal lingo means. What is promoted versus status? Post date versus change date. In the context of here, one has to do with editing content, where another one has to do with where this appears in the reverse chronological order of news stories. And then being able to show more than just what the content overview page shows by default. So adding a thumbnail image, adding the author, which actually in this case is different from who the actual content author is. This is the posted author who gets the byline on the blog post, which isn't always the person who actually wrote the content. So personalizing each of these columns as it fits your organization. Adding that image one has saved me a bunch of times when folks start wondering why a design's breaking apart and they realize they didn't add images to areas where it's not required, but it certainly is helpful for the integrity of the design. Along with that, the dashboard gives you an idea of where you can prioritize tasks. So here's one that's not just content itself, but it's a collection of tools. Logging into this media-related site, we have the create content links across the top as icons. This was a very simple custom code that you can add to your site. So an introductory programming task, but certainly not a module I know out of the box. And they are contextually aware of your users' permissions, so you only see the links of the content that you can create. Below that, on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a popular today. For this site, there was this weird, unnerving feeling of, I publish my content, is it live? And I never knew quite what that meant. Maybe a previous CMS rubbed them the wrong way, but yes, your content is live. They wanted to see the view count. And as long as there was numbers, they felt happy, although I sometimes question if it was them checking their own work. That's a different story. Either way, I was able to take a story from a user and translate it into a very actionable block of text here. The one on the right-hand side is recently changed. This is the user story of, how do I find that content that I was working on yesterday? So giving a short list of recently changed content was an easy win. And then across the bottom, we had just a series of components that were internal help text. So it was instructions on how to use Drupal, how the voice and tone should be in the theme of this website, different tools that we were using for the web dam, for media assets, and something I include everywhere, how to request help. Because your users are going to have frustrations, so you got to give them that outlet. Dashboards can be further personalized. That last one was mostly about organizational-wide, but I told you about my summer camps. So I host summer camps in the Philadelphia area. It's a little side project of mine. And when my camp counselors log in, they have two things that they're most concerned about. Where am I working? When am I getting paid? And one thing I'm concerned about, which is your address. I hire a lot of teachers, and I also hire a lot of college students that end up moving over the course of the summer they're working. So it's important for payroll reasons that I know where you live. So front and center is your address and contact information. Of course, that's fake. And the schedule below. And this gives, well, fake in this example. For them, I want them to approve it. And the schedule below is for them to not only see what's upcoming, but for them to flag any changes. So we try to put the schedule there weeks ahead of time, only showing a curated version of what I want to show. There is another page that's all about the schedule. There's another page, actually below this would be a payroll teaser. There's another page that's all about the payroll. And they can get a deep dive into that data. But this was just my red alert, red flag, show you what's upcoming, so the instant they log in, they can get a quick look at everything that's important to them in their role in this organization. These dashboards allow you to create reports that commonly reference datasets or for completing common tasks. This is an example of a web conference website I worked on. One of the roles was to look at incoming session proposals and vote on them, leave comments. Did we think that this would be a fit for this track or that track? This person talked last year and they did an outstanding job. So this dashboard has a few things. We're just using Drupal views again. Almost all these examples are views based. Where we can look at programs sorted by submit date, so the newest ones float to the top, are the proposals coming in for sessions. There is a comment count field, so we can see recent activity, and there's a rating field. It's using the 5-star module to allow folks to vote right in line if they already have enough information about this. Also to look at their rating versus the aggregate rating of others. And I don't know if I've mentioned on here, I do. So exporting this as a feed was also important. Something I've noticed regularly is that content publishers I've worked with are using the views I create to select, copy the view, paste it into Excel, rearrange it, fight with the HTML that inevitably gets pulled in with that paste, and then create something that they can share with the people that they report to, higher level stakeholders. And when I realized this was happening, it was once again a no-brainer win for my publishing stories. I can give you an export. Oh, they were happy. And it was such an easy extension from views. So there are views plugins that will let you export in different formats. I'm a CSV fan because it gets a little flaky sometimes when you go to higher type file formats. Out of the box, Views has exposed filters and arguments, so you've probably used these if you're familiar with Views. This is mostly just a reminder to use them. So being able to sort by taxonomy through autocompletes, in that case it was entity reference, sort by date, sort by published status. This is nothing earth-shattering, although maybe it is an excuse for me to say that all of these are alterable. So once again, there's an alter hook for your views, and you could alter these fields. I'll regularly do that for entity references, because entity references are looking for, say, an entity ID, and that's not useful at all, but you can easily replace that with a select list if you just query the list of options you want to present. So once again, easy programming task. If you have any questions, let me know. Bulk operations is another great way to improve editor workflows, and this is another one that I've reacted to often, where I see somebody has to edit 30 pages, and they'll visit each page, perform that one task, click save. Next page, perform that one task, click save. Some of these you're probably aware of because it's Drupal out of the box. You're on the content overview page. You can select a dozen pages and publish them all at once. That's through the Action plugin system. Action plugins are a great intro programming task. It is very easy to just take a list of reference content and perform an action on them. Some examples in the past: approving or rejecting content in a workflow, or even expediting the workflow process. Using the plugins to change a bunch of values in mass. So if there's a series of events that are reoccurring and the event has happened and we want to reuse that content for a future date, this is our chance to select 10 articles, and the plugin action could be update the event date value. There's a pop-up, you put in the value, and now all 10 articles are changed with one interaction. Or even tagging of blogs is another one where I want to look at a whole listing of blogs, figure out where they fit in the taxonomy. So I select 10 or 20 articles, add the tag XYZ. Actions are valuable to me. Cloning is another one that has come a long way. The entity clone module will allow you to take existing content and create a duplication of it. I have found so many authors that were doing manual chores to create the same piece of content 7 times, changing only a couple of fields. So another easy win, but with some cautions. You have to make sure that cloning of content works in your data model. Certainly as you get into reference content or the use of paragraphs, there are some limits to what you can and should want to clone. But for me, I have my summer camp website back up again because I'll host the same event 30 times over the course of the summer with just the location being different. So I don't want to reinvent the marketing tags and all of the staffing notes on each one. I'll create the event once, I'll hit clone, change the 1 or 2 details I want, save, hit clone, change the 1 or 2 details I want, hit saved. This was a huge time saver for me, but use with caution. Weights is another module that I've used in the past as a user interface element, but out of the box, it doesn't necessarily do anything of value, so I have to give an example. In this case, the site had content listed in a program menu. And so in Drupal, there's not a real granular set of permissions around menus. It's kind of an all or nothing. And we wanted authors to be able to organize the order of pages in the menu without giving them access to the menu itself. So the weight module allowed us to use groups, or use Drupal views to show a listing of nodes that just so happen to relate to the content links in the main menu, and allowed them to drag and drop the elements in this view. And since it related to the content menus, it was an easy sort. So just sort by the weight of the element as this property. So weights is a nice way to sort any type of content. In this case, we did it so we can have a view that powered the menu without giving actual editorial control of the menu. Views entity form field and toggle entity fields are 2 modules I've used to save time on redundant tasks as well. So in this case, this is back to my summer camp where we have staffing. And I need to start assigning staff for the coming weeks. Depending on how many kids enroll, I might want more or less counselors to maintain our staff ratios. I might move people around based on their interests or what age ranges they're best accustomed to working with. Some are great with the teens, some can't stand working with the teens. So this is my interface to look at the next coming weeks and edit all of these, in this case, event nodes in one view. The ability to change all of this and click save once has been such a lifesaver for me. I've also seen this used regularly on one of our sites with contact information, where we can see an entire list of staff, their phone numbers, their email addresses, with a single save button at the bottom. Prevents us from having to edit multiple users over and over again. Just create a single common interface. Keep folks away from the Drupal stuff as best you can. And honestly, this presentation, I could talk for hours. So my last 2 slides here for this part of the presentation are just the ones I would love to talk about, but I'm running out of time. So to pick out some of my favorites, I would like to, these are some of the user stories I've heard in the past. I was working on a page yesterday. How do I find it? Did that new thing get published? What events are displaying across all categories? That's been a useful one to see how content's being used, because often folks will look at an event's calendar but not be able to see all the metadata building it. So having a view that shows that. What alerts are scheduled for the site has been a prominent one I've used on a dashboard, so folks can see content that changes based on time and have reassurance that it is going to publish on its correct schedule, because they can't always validate it in the context of the website itself. What meta tags are used for each landing page? I'll create views that are specific to your role in an organization. So often I'll see overloaded views where the dashboard has every possible attribute for that page, and it's just too many columns. It's a cognitive load for anyone to take in that kind of information. So I suggest breaking out your content dashboards by role, either Drupal role or your role in the organization. And I'll often create a view just for accessibility related data, a view just for SEO related data, a view for high level data that our product owners are worried about, but maybe the day-to-day staff doesn't care about. So you can distill just to the information that you're interested in. Accessibility, I did mention, just being able to see a list of all the media assets that are currently in use, sorted by when they were added. This is a way to avoid the constant reiteration over your content to check for accessibility markup. And image is one of those just typical content offenders. So whoever our quality assurance person is for a project can look at everything that changed in the last week, last month, whatever your frequency is, in a single view and spot check. Performance is another one. Which pages have the most traffic? I've seen a lot of folks try to tie their analytics into their view. And actually, there's one that I had to put an asterisk by. Where can I find my content? Air quotes. Because I don't know what my content is. Is that the content that you literally edited? Is that the content that you were the last revision owner of? Is that the content, if you're using the groups module, that you are a member of that group and that group has the content within it? So there's often a governance question of what is my content when you get into building custom dashboards. And I generally would rather give you too much, but then give you the tools to filter down to what you were actually looking for. So in the second half of this, I want to talk about some of the forms themselves. That was the high-level dashboard. What can we do to improve the forms? And for me, it's all about the fields. So those widget types, the fields, the formatters, and making sure you're using the right tool for the job. There's a huge landscape of custom and contrib modules to help. I will try to list some of those off as I go through what I think were some of our highest priority challenges for improving these forms. But it comes down to data type. Is it a Boolean? Is it a date? Is it a link? Is it a number? A telephone field? There's a lot of extensions that you can do to improve your content forms. And the biggest offender for me is the overuse, misuse, the abuse of the text field. In the case of a phone number, and maybe this is because I'm a backend engineer, I'm thinking data. Did you want that hyphen or are there parentheses around the area code? Did you even want an area code? The link field, for me, Twitter is the one that just drives me nuts when I'm filling out a form and there's a link field and it says, what's your Twitter? And do you want my name, my handle with the @ sign? Do you want the fully qualified link? Because that may break how you use this content later. Price, there's no context of currency. And the one that really drives me nuts is just address when it's a text field. Just, you figure it out. Don't worry about it. It might not seem like a problem, but it's garbage in, garbage out. So later on, if you ever want to do a mailer, who knows what format that will be in. It's nice to know that for each one of these, there's probably a widget or formatter that can help you along the way. In the case of address, I use the Commerce Guys address module. Love it. And the formatting of the elements themselves, there are email, telephone, and date fields that use the HTML markup. What's nice about these is browsers are constantly getting new support systems based on the keyboards and contextual information for the browser device. So the date field will actually come with a calendar pop-up. The telephone field will come with a keypad, not your numeric or your alphanumeric keyboard, because we don't need QWERTY if it's a phone number. So using the correct field formatters, some of this is available in Drupal core, others through custom modules that are very popular to have the right field for the job. Not only helps your front-end users, but let's make sure we attach it to the back end too. In fact, I usually see this kind of stuff used on front-end forms. Link is another project I use constantly on our sites. This is the case where you need to select a node reference, and maybe it is a ancillary piece of content that's like upcoming events, but it turns out on your site you have 300 blocks called upcoming events. And so you start typing upcoming events in your autocomplete, and the autocomplete just fills with the same title over and over and over again, and you don't know which one it is. And at that point, I start to train my editors, oh, well, find the one you want in Drupal, and then look for the node ID, and then when you're using the entity reference field, just make sure you pick the one with the correct node ID. They should never have to learn how to do that. It's not useful. Linkit is a solution for me for that. It allows you to provide customized teasers, and it lets you really trick out what that autocomplete looks like. There's a lot of logic you can put behind it, extending it not just to the surface level data, but you can really process that data into something meaningful. And select lists, this is something that stuck with me watching Luke speak. Dropdown should be the UI of last resort. In general, he was talking about mobile devices and the interaction it takes to use a dropdown. But often they are overused for a number of the forms that I work on. So I'm always looking for the next thing. The selector other module, multi-select. The one all the way on the right I use most often, and that's chosen to. It's been a win for me to start typing and have some amount of autocomplete, but it is still a select list. And it comes in other flavors. There's a tagging version. I recommend it. With one caveat, I have found that some of the chosen features might have some accessibility blockers. So use it with caution. Test it before you go. Computed fields is another project in Drupal that I absolutely love. In this case, this is my timesheet for working a summer camp. The camp counselor is going to fill out the fields actually at the very bottom of the screen. How many hours did I work that day and how far did I drive? So their hours and their mileage per day. But I'm going to aggregate that data into total hours worked, their total miles drove, and then the total payment due, which is some calculation thereof. It's not hard to do the math in some sort of form in real time. But I actually want to query off of that data. So the computed field not only will do the math for it, but it will store it in the Drupal database and allow you to sort, query, and perform any of your kind of reporting calculations off of the data in the computed field. In my case, I'm using it for numbers, but you can do it for all kinds of text manipulation, date manipulation, even geolocation-related data. So you want to know distance from type things you can save as a computed field. So as I mentioned, Drupal's extensibility is a big feature of it, and it lets site architects do some fun things. But without careful consideration, the content forms just can become unwieldy. And I had to zoom out just to see any of it, but this was an example of a news article out of the box that I was working on a site. And the form just kept going on. And as I looked at it, I wasn't sure what all the fields referenced. There was a Boolean checkbox in the middle, and I couldn't figure out if that was related to the fields near it. With a few steps, we can tame these forms. So a few examples of what we can do for forms. Changing the title. So altering the add and edit form titles is a simple way to add direction to the content editors. In most Drupal sites, you're going to have something like create or add new content type. So add session is maybe not as useful as create a session or submit a proposal. Using edit forms, and there's a few Drupal modules that will do this as well, to change the titles of your known forms, just provides more direction. So instead of create application, if this was a job site, how about join our team? Instead of create timesheet, track your time. And instead of create alert, set a campus alert message. You can likewise apply this logic to the bottom of the form, where you would just have a save button. Save, yeah, it means something to us because we're literally putting data in the database, but I don't know that it provides the correct meaning to the folks who are using this form. Once again, it's a simple alter to change that language from save to submit a proposal, add a position to the job board, post to this news feed. Field groups and tabs are another way to organize interface elements. For me, I like to keep the most relevant fields at the top of the page, front and center, the ones that are edited often, and the ones that are not needed, either, I don't want to say hide them, but put them in a less pronounced way, or put them in a place where they can be discovered as needed. So I will keep going back to my summer camp page because I can share those pictures all day, and I approve. I have the page laid out in 4 different field groups with the tabs on the left. Event details is the core of what makes an event. It's the logistics. These are the things that I need to fill out to create the content. None of the other fields need to be filled out, although I see a star next to registration. I think it has a default value already. So by default, I need to fill out the first tab. Over the course of the life cycle of this content, different people will edit it. So the second tab, marketing details, that's something else I'm usually in charge of. I will add Google Analytics tracking IDs. I will add any relevant information about the instructors or events that we're doing as part of this. So before and after care for the kids, things that we are marketing specific to this event. That's the second tab because it's a different way to interact with this content, and it's not always something I interact with. The third one, registration. My business partner will fill that piece out once those details are available. Events don't go in the registration system the day of. We have to wait until registration opens, usually later in the spring. And finally, staffing. That's the last thing we fill out. A third person, our camp director, fills that out. So everything she needs is behind the fourth tab. What's nice is we all have our own place on this form. If you want a more technical example, we could even alter the node edit form per user. When you're in Drupal, the button's not obvious, but it's under the structure menu. You can add additional forms and decide that not all fields are available to all users all the time. So that is an out-of-the-box Drupal thing. Instead of taking things away, I wanted to trust my users. I just wanted to take the cognitive load off them and group the fields into a way that was meaningful. In the tabs on the left, I've been moving more towards tabs on the top to make things a little more mobile friendly, or using some sort of accordion just to minimize the footprint of the fields on the screen. Another just easy win is use field descriptions. So every element has some place where you can keep instructions, and you know that, you've used them, but maybe the thing I can suggest is that your description should be written by your content stakeholders who actually use this field, because it'll be in their language. And this was a good example of recommended academic plan, degree audits. I don't know what these things mean without further context, but somebody else did. I can add the fields and do the architecture work, but help me communicate it to the folks who are actually going to use this form. Field permissions are another way to extend this. I don't use these lightly. Field permissions do add a level of complexity to your architecture, but in the case of submitting a timesheet to my summer camp staff, the folks who are working the event, my camp counselors, cannot adjust their own pay rate. I'm sure they would like to, but they can't. Instead, that is my camp director or one of the administrative users. So they need to be able to view the field, but they can't edit the field. And you can get very granular very fast. So I am cautious to use these, but know that those options are there. Client-side validation. I wish I had a good example of this. I was trying to come up with some. I can list a few off. There is a client-side validation module, or it is very easy to add JavaScript or processing of forms. So any of your forms, you can add a custom validation plugin. Validation plugins are an easy programming task for anyone getting into Drupal's plugin system, which just says, given the data on this form, does it pass this check? And you're going to return a true or a false with a message. So if it failed, we'll give a reason why it failed, and hopefully a reason that's more meaningful than what Drupal might tell you. No offense to Drupal. Drupal will know you can't put this paragraph here, but it doesn't know why. So you can provide a little more detail. A couple of examples. If you have and we use paragraphs a lot for our components to map our components to the content model in Drupal. So if you have a paragraph set that they need to be in a specific order, this type of paragraph, the hero, always has to be the top one if you're using it on the page. That's something you can validate. It's harder to brute force that logic unless you're creating separate fields, but really it's just all the same paragraphs. Or maybe if you want to have a call to action paragraph, but you're only allowed to have one per page. That's an easy validation as well. So I don't want to micromanage what the form looks like. I just want to have a paragraph field. Use it as much as you want. We'll provide instructions. The instructions will say you can add a call to action, but only one. And if they add two, we'll validate on form submit. You can also attach custom CSS and JavaScript. That's another way to give users visual cues along the way. So as they interact with a form element, maybe additional instructions appear. In this case, we're just loading from our style sheets the colors that are associated with these 5 values in the radio buttons. So as you're picking the color scheme for this section of content, what does that look like? What does the palette look like? It's not a fully rendered example, but we can get a sense of that this swirl flavor is blue and gold. And it's written out in text because that was my easiest way to be accessible, but also with the visual down below, just loading that as JavaScript attached to the form. Finally, your form looks tidy, you're using the right fields, you click submit, where is that user taken? And so the user story here, I've heard time and again, is folks shouldn't see this page. So in the example of the web conference, there's been several where folks submit, say, a session they want to, and they should be taken to the thank you for submitting page. Or here is in a job application system, folks could fill out the application, but they're not allowed to see it once it's submitted into our database. So instead we take them to a thank you page. These redirects are very easy to add in Drupal. There's a lot of out-of-the-box support for this, and some simple tweaks you can make to redirect on node submit. The idea of going to a thank you page is the most common use case for me, but I was recently working on a tech support ticketing system. And so after creating a ticket, the most useful place wasn't to look at the ticket they just created, it was to add another ticket, because it was the help desk staff filling in all the phone calls that they got that day, and they just needed one after another to knock them out. So it's wonderful for me when I empower a user, and I don't know, they get super happy when you do something as simple as take them back to the content create form after submitting was all of a sudden a win because I understood their organizational workflow. And my final note on enhancing forms, and this is one that if you're around tonight, we can talk about more because I can make a whole presentation on how form displays can be used to enhance those forms. So the displays themselves can be leveraged to reduce the footprint. There are always parts that either shouldn't be viewed or should be viewed in a different way. And so in this example, we're showing a series of paragraphs. The paragraphs have large image assets. They're also in a collection. So the paragraph has, in this case, say 3 cards that go across the site or stack on smaller displays. I actually couldn't fit all the content in the left screenshot. That was the original out-of-the-box paragraph teaser. But instead, we created a curated set of styles that are just internal to our users. And they're for representing how the content comes together on the site, not previewing it necessarily. So on the right, we see the 3 images. They're stacked. The content related to that image appears to the right of the image rather than below it. Because when you do below, actually in the middle, on the left side, it's hard to tell if that textual content applies to the image above or the image below. So moving it to the right, the last thing we did was add a horizontal line to the left just to delineate which content was grouped with which elements, especially as the text wrapped to multiple lines. And you'll see that in the lower example where we have 2 of these cards next to each other and that vertical line is showing which content is grouped together. This was not a hard win. This was just making sure that every paragraph had a preview view mode and that we had styles prepared for that preview view mode. And we use them consistently throughout the site. And so to finish out with my messaging, just in an increasingly competitive market, there are some very high expectations on what we as an open source community are contributing. So I encourage you, I share a bunch of my stories. I encourage you to discover your users' frustrations, their workarounds, and then share them with this community because I know together we'll just keep building applications that our clients love. And thank you. So, any questions? Yes?
This session seems to be mostly about like UX, but from like backend, admin, content manager user perspective. And clients tend to care much more about the UX for like anonymous users, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's like, I guess where UX departments tend to focus as well on anonymous users. So is this more on UX to be more proactive about like finding what the admins and content managers need, or is it more on stakeholders to just sort of wing it to figure out what they should be doing?
That is a philosophical question I've been wrestling with because I do have some amazing UX folks on my team, but I can't imagine many of our clients would want to invest in budgeting time for UX on the forms. And I think it's something that I just owe to the community to try to get our UXers to weigh in on and come up with conventions that we can use for everyone and contribute that code, because I'm not sure that most of these things can be fixed for every website out the gate as part of a build. They almost have to become standard tool sets because I don't think most projects are going to want to invest serious time into tricking out our content forms. And yeah, I'm just hesitant to think that folks will have the budget to give this kind of consideration, at least on a new project. But I definitely, in my ideal world, I would like to see a UX designer take a look at the forms first and not be bogged down by the Drupal conventions. And usually when I approach these, I'm thinking about how Drupal does it. And something as simple as somebody asking, hey, can we put the instructions for this field on top of the field? And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't. The instructions go on the bottom, because I'm thinking just in the context of Drupal. But that is honestly a very rational recommendation, and I need somebody outside of Drupal itself to even weigh in on those. But I'm not sure who's always going to pay for it. As a company, we are starting to realize it's important to invest time in that so that no one says and perpetuates the idea, well, Drupal's hard or Drupal's confusing. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's just where I've been at emotionally with this conversation. Anything else?
I just a general question. How do you feel about the UX for editors with Layout Builder? Do you have any feedback on that?
I'm not too familiar with it. I've got to experiment with Layout Builder, and I'm very excited, but cautious. So what I have grown to accept is there are cases where having the full Layout Builder interface is going to be helpful, and I'm thinking landing pages. That is the one where I have over-engineered forms to try to provide flexibility, and it shouldn't be that hard. In fact, I've been playing around with Squarespace and Weebly, and I'm trying to think of all the other ones that have some sort of component library, and they're just so easy, where you click a button and you see a visual representation of all the content, and I want to just drag it onto the screen. But as a backend engineer, I'm cautious because that data is stored in a way that's not always predictable, and I would like to have very strict limits based on how content is used. And in most organizations I work with, I think they might be cautious about giving their editors too much control. So I want to roll it out on the obvious use cases and see where it goes. And I actually really hope that it replaces a lot of the tools I'm currently using, even paragraphs. Right now I do a lot of nesting of paragraphs, where you might have a paragraph for a set of cards, and then each card is its own paragraph. And sometimes I'll even have like a grandchildren type relationship. And that seems like a misuse of the data model too. So if I can get to something native Drupal, like through the Layout Builder, I'm all about it. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I had, I'm sorry, I think the replacing the content pages and the dashboards sort of go in this line, but I was wondering if you have further ideas on workflows, as well as, not only moving from one person to another, but tracking that as it goes along.
I do, and I have a longer version of this presentation with a workflow section. When I knew I would run out of time, I cut it. But with one reason in particular, there's a former colleague of mine did a presentation on workflows yesterday. So take a look. Andrew Cox did a session, and him and I worked together a decade ago. We both ended up at this conference talking about improving the editor interface. So I don't know who heard us, but it's still coming out strong that we're preaching about it. He included a few details there. I think it's important to leverage notifications. And I'm trying to think of my slide deck for that section. Notifications are important. The ability to show differences in content changes has been a challenging one, but a very important one, and often requires some custom code because the diff module, while it's nice, it doesn't help when content is used for things like layout or settings of a page. You need just something a little more intuitive to show, say, how deeply nested fields, the data within deeply nested fields has changed. So I've had to leverage the diff module in very custom ways. I haven't found a good tool to show that before and after view that I really want to show. And then as far as the workflow states, that's what most of my editorial dashboards are about in some way. So sometimes it's as simple as having a column, but most of the time it's an individual dashboard so that per role in the organization, you have your place to do the tasks that you're most familiar with. And if you're in charge of approving changes, that's your dashboard. In my 2 slides that had the long list of bullets, there was one I didn't mention, and it was about stale content. There was a website I worked on, and they were very interested in what happens after a year. They had some sensitive content, and they wanted to make sure that it was always up to date because there were some values, some numbers that actually could lead to legal issues if they weren't up to date. So we created a view that was just, for this one content type, show me all the nodes that have not been edited in the last 365 days, and if so, it appears on this page, and they can make a superficial change. Edit it, click save, and at least their mind's at ease that their content's not out of date. So some of those are actually more clever examples, just using view, but most of it is using some sort of a workflow module. And I use I want to say it's workflows, the one that's closest to Drupal core. If not, it's workflow. And my apologies for getting those backwards, but I think you can understand why that's confusing. Anything else? Yes?
That longer presentation you have, where can you find that?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The longer presentation you have?
Oh,
Where can you find that?
I'll have some cards up here and I'll connect with you. So I have some more slides that I had cut from this deck and I'll gladly share them out. All right, well, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.